Good afternoon, YouTube, family, folk, and hopefully some fairly interesting heathens. Nice day, I thought, for a quick video. I kind of was brainstorming, and being that I'd say I'm fairly new to the YouTube scene as far as the folkish versus universalist types that seem to dominate the spaces we see. People who present themselves with an air of authority on many of these subjects. So I thought I'd just kind of put my 2 cents in. Nothing too formal or serious. And as I said, my videos are primarily geared for maybe my kids or grandkids someday, and not necessarily for creating a big audience, right? That being said, it seems like there's a trap, a forked path that most people fall into, is either a universalist or a folkish heathen. Now, for me personally, I would have to say this is not something I chose, right? This path is not something I chose. I came to this looking for answers for various experiences I had throughout my life. Abrahamic thinking, Christianity did not offer any solutions, even though I kept trying to force myself into that path, into that outlook. I explored other things associated with a lot of the martial arts training I was doing, whether it was different types of esoteric Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism, and trying to understand different realms of consciousness, so to speak, and perspectives on the world and the universe at large. And there's a lot of interesting insights that are gleaned from that experience, but it's not in and of itself the same. There was something still missing. Throughout my life, I had experiences that you can't really explain. I would say, I like to use the word dreams, because oftentimes this happened like in a dream state, but it was beyond that. It's more like what I've seen some people describe. DMT users often describe as going into a vivid, intense other world that's beyond a hallucination. I would say it was kind of like that. Now, I'm not advocating people do those sorts of things or anything like that, and me personally, I've lived a very clean life. I think my only vice is the occasional drink, and coffee. I drink coffee like crazy. So no, I'm not crazy or on drugs or any of those things. And describing my earlier experiences through childhood, there's a lot of them. Some became real intense, and they had no explanation. When most people talk about the Ausir, or they talk about the Vanir, they talk about these things, they talk about them from a clinical scholar approach, which I think is perfectly fine. You know, you could read all the books and sources you want on Wikipedia or wherever, and you can memorize the sagas and the Eddas and the Havamal and all these great things. And I think that's a very noble pursuit to do those things. However, I could also see the holes in that way of thinking. I could tell some people have never had these kind of experiences. Very few people have that I've come across have had the experiences I find comparable to my own. And so for me, I didn't come to this. I came to this with a lot of questions. I seen these things described as I experienced their manifestation before I even knew what they were, if that makes any sense. So enough about me on this thing. I'm just kind of getting the point out there that these titles and categories people put out there are artificial, and I'm not one who likes to take any person, any individual, and put them in a box. I kind of hate making a video about this called universalist versus folkish, because too many people do this nowadays, where they try to put you in a box. Each person is unique, has their own unique experiences, life experiences, and I don't like it when it's done to me. It's been done to me plenty of times. But at the same time, there seems to be a pattern that's kind of emerged out of all this that I wanted to address. And I took a few notes. I got me this little dry erase board, and I just kind of jotted things down today while I was thinking. And we're snowed in a little bit, and I thought, well, this is a good time to do this. Coffee kind of burned me a bit. Anyway, I think there's kind of a polarized group of people, the folkish versus universalist, and I actually don't think that they are necessarily reflective of the entire movement as a whole. I think they're reflective of modern political movements at odds with each other that tend to dominate this sphere of thinking. It's hard for me to explain. I mean, I know many of you probably experience this. Some of you probably fall into these categories or identify with those categories. Now, I would say that of the two, I have found, this is just my experience, browsing YouTube videos and talking to people, in my experience, it is usually the universalists that are the most intolerant, or the ones who proclaim to be universalists, the most intolerant of opposing views whatsoever, and they rush to judgment the most. Now, that being said, and by the way, for those of you who've never who don't know what I'm talking about, folkish tend to be labeled as those who stay inclusive to their racial or tribal groups, and universalists tend to be those who just anybody can come and go. It's kind of open, as they call it, totally inclusive. But it's not really a satisfactory explanation to me. If I look to the universalists, and I wanted to say positive things about the ones who identify as that, I think it's enthusiasm tends to be the norm for them. They tend to be enthusiastic. They've found this treasure, which is these faith systems, these belief systems. Mostly we're talking about pre-Christian European faith systems, but universalists expand that out to be throughout the world. They go beyond cultural syncretism to the point of embracing and exchanging ideas and free thinking and comparing and contrasting ideas from your own culture to others, which I think is healthy. I think that's good to say, okay, they have another word for something that's kind of the same thing. They kind of get a little far off when they try to say that they're all the same. I don't agree with that. There's definitely distinct differences. So if I had to say that was a positive side of the universalists, I'd say this open-minded quest for knowledge and the enthusiasm. I think the enthusiasm is really good. They want to share this with the world. They just want to stand out there and say, look what I've found, look what I've come across, look how it's helped me. And I think that's a positive thing. That's not a bad thing. Conversely, on the folkish side, they tend to be more authentic as far as what the traditions were. They tend to get more tradition focused as to what was the original meaning behind things. Now that's not for all of them. There's been a lot of modern, I'd say neo-pagan involvement in both the folkish and universalists. They tend to follow, there's tended to be a Wiccan pattern within both of them. There tends to be kind of lazy approaches to where these traditions come from. That's a side note though, but the folkish people tend to be acknowledging the aspect of this is a unique cultural movement that really has its origins in these Germanic cultures or Celtic cultures, if you follow Celtic pantheons or whatever, that there is a family, genetic, tribal line to this. And this is where the two have really big bouts with each other. The universalists will quickly call folkish people just racist. They'll throw Nazis out there. They throw all these insults at them, and the folkish people will make fun of the universalists for being, hippies with fairy wings and, not standing for anything and, just far out there. I think both can be right and wrong. I think that they can say these are the extreme positions of each side, and it kind of becomes they're chasing each other's tails. They get to where they really get nowhere. The folkish people tend to be right. They can cite examples where things were unique to the family. I mean, the word is kin is Germanic. As kindred, it's Germanic. It's the idea of family. It's unique. They have various notions of gods being progenitors to their tribes. Whether it's, I can give some examples. You got Beowulf talks about ancestor veneration. You have the Saxons defended from Saxnoth, Jagui Freyr, I pronounced that wrong. Ugh. A little chilly, I'm kind of messing with my pronunciations. Sorry for butchering some of these. And of course, Tacitus with Germania, he cites examples, with Manos being the fountainhead of Germanic tribes. You know, it's almost got a parallel to Odin, Vile, and Ve, you know, where he has 3 sons, and they are progenitors of these Germanic peoples. And obviously Scandinavians are Germanic, you know. So we're looking at this idea that the folkish people have some right to say this is uniquely ours, it comes from us, it belongs to us, just as Native American spirituality belongs to Native Americans, or different African traditions, I would say pre-Islamic and pre-Christian traditions are to them, just as Abrahamic faith is unique to those of Semitic ancestry. You know, the folkish people are right in the sense that, I'm just watching, there's a deer walking up there on the hill, kind of eyeballing me, sorry. The folkish people are making the valid points that in this modern age, most people of European ancestry don't know about their own cultures, their own ancestry, their own history. They know very little of it, and we're kind of being discouraged from it. Now, it's not a jump on the bandwagon and say, hey, you know, we're being punished for being white, although there are people that want to do that. I mean, that's, you can hear them in their own words, you know. I don't want it to devolve into that discussion on that. But for instance, I have, you know, I'm here in the United States, and we have a lot of Native American traditions, and I don't get offended when Native Americans tell me, hey, you know, you have some distant family or people you know that are Native American, and they're invited to these spiritual, cultural recognition of who they are. And if you aren't part of that, you're not part of that family, you're kind of outside of that. I mean, obviously, depending on if you're invited or not and all those things, but that doesn't offend me. That's their idea, that's something unique to them, and if anything, they kind of experienced something in the 20th century and a little bit before that Europeans experienced at the hands of the Romans and various other cultures, you know. Of course, I know Romans are Southern Europeans, but, you know, at the hands of other cultures, well, Christianization was not a Roman thing, not really, not originally. So our ancestors had a wave of these horrible things happen to them, these atrocities, and the elimination and extermination of their culture. And then generations later, you have the same people that were hurt before now following that mindset and exporting that same hurt to the rest of the world. So the bigger picture is always more complex than just, you know, mudslinging on the internet, which is easy. You know, finding the truth and heart of the matter is always much more challenging. But you got, but the folkish people nowadays are right. This modern movement where we're being told, hey, you know, you can't have something that belongs to you, that this does not belong to you, and people try to even argue that it doesn't even come from you. And I'm like, oh, you're kind of wrong. You know, there's clearly a historical and archaeological record that proves otherwise. The etymological record also. Excuse me. I'm a little stammering from kind of the cold. I'm a little chillier than I expected to be, although I love it. There you go. You know, I mean, I'm suited to this kind of weather. Yeah. Wait a second. Nope, I'm getting old and blind. That's not a deer up there. It looks like a coyote prowling. I should have brought out the AR. Yeah, okay. Probably. I probably need some glasses. That'd be terrible if I felt like a neighbor had a new dog that I didn't see and shot it. That'd be terrible. Anyway. We get overwhelmed by coyotes and wild hogs here. So, very destructive on so many ends. So anyway, yeah, they're routinely being told that they have nothing. Now, obviously there was an example I was going to mention about a Swedish alpha bloat, where a Christian was looking for shelter, I think, from bad weather or something like that. I'm not sure if I'm quoting it correctly, but family members routinely said he can't be there. They kicked him out. They said it's a family thing, it's private. Therefore, there is a lot of family veneration. There is a lot of ancestor veneration. There is a lot of this. The gods are friends and kin to us, not just an idea that we just blindly worship for favors. Okay, that's not what we do. So that's a hard thing for a lot of people. I think modern people to get used to. We're so used to Abrahamism, where we're used to begging for things, for scraps of things. We're not used to seeing, living a noble, strong life, and trying to be strong for the Asir, for the Vanir, or if whatever word you use to describe. I don't like the word gods anymore. It's a loaded word, right? So the bad thing is, though, yes, there are those cringy elements that get into the folkish movement. There are those cringy elements where they are rooted in hating other people for who they are. And there's a lot of energy spent hating other people for it. And it's easy to do. You can always find somebody that hates you for who you are, regardless of race or whatever else. They're everywhere. And get kind of fixated on that. It's one thing to defend your traditions. It's one thing to defend your cultural identity and preserve it and say, hey, there's a reason we want to keep these things about us. And that's fine. That's fine. But at the same time, not everybody thinks that way. It shouldn't be I hate you because you don't agree with me type of deal. Now, conversely, universalists, they've become very, very dogmatic, very much wearing radical left-wing politics on their sleeve, and they do this mostly to, it's a coyote. He's looking at me now. He finally hears me talking. He's lucky I can smack him from here. He's probably about, I'm looking 175, 180 yards. Strange, he's curious, he's coming my way. He's kind of eavesdropping on me. Yeah, enough about the coyote. Anyway, but universalists can really get into these radical left-wing causes where it becomes about everything else. They're social justice warriors. It becomes about everything else other than their spirituality and their quest for it and their understanding of it. It's almost an obsession with it. I think, like, for instance, I ran into a bunch of them, and there's some I have polite conversations with. I ran into one guy. He was Jewish. He was Jewish, non-binary, queer as he identified himself, who claimed to be Norse pagan, and he was advocating that certain runes don't be used because it might offend people of color. And I was like, what? I was like, and then I started debating it with him. He acts kind of, well, I've been threatened, and we can be victimized, and I don't think this is a good thing, and we can scare people, and he almost had a whiny sort of Abrahamic way of approaching something that he chose to become. And now we had a polite discussion. I didn't slam him or insult him or any of those things, and I'm not going to. I think his spiritual quest is his own. However, his views did not represent mine. I've had all kinds of discussions about this with people who are from different racial and ethnic backgrounds, and they're always good conversations, especially in person. Now, the internet's a different story. Everybody's, trolls are a dime a dozen on the internet, and I don't know why they're still even there if they think they're special, because everybody's burnt. People have been ignoring them, and for at least 10 years now, I would think. But typically in person, I have great conversations, and I can explain to them some of the symbolism, some of the metaphorical nature of these things, and the archetypal nature of these things, and how it differs. And usually they're great conversations. So, and I refer to them often to good scholars. There's some people up there who have good, a little caveat. Scholars are wonderful for telling you the historical record that they know of, the archaeological record, the linguistic changes that happen over time and how it influences our speech now. Like obviously, the winter, I'm thinking scathy, and how the word scathing is cognate to it. And I thought, well, that's fascinating. That makes sense. This scathing winter, So there's little hidden meanings that help us get a little clarity into these old things. So, without getting into that too much, there's the scholarly approach, which stops, though, because they aren't believers or followers. I don't like to use the word belief. That's like an abstract faith thing. To me, it's more like experience. Like I said, I was taught to believe in Christianity as a kid, but for me, I kept having experiences, real, tangible experiences that were sometimes frightening, sometimes intense, sometimes unexplainable, that the only thing that made sense to me was these explanations I discovered later. You know, I ran into other pagans once, and I was telling them about an experience, and they said, well, that's Thor you're talking about. You experienced Thor. And I'm like, what? And then I started thinking, oh, wait, that's not even, it sounded right. It made sense. It felt right. It was more than just I knew it here, I felt it here. I understood it. It's like every fiber of my being, every bit of my DNA understood that. So, yeah, it's not something that you can just pick and choose. Now, everybody tries to claim to be the sole authority. Not everybody, but that's a broad statement in itself. I think you have some people that tend to present themselves as sole authorities. Now, the problem with the folkish movement, the one thing I don't agree with is they're trying to say, well, the gods would not recognize, say, offerings from people who are not, excuse me, who are not of a certain bloodline. And some are so crazy, like it has to, even 1% of non-European blood means you can't, and it's like, no, whatever. You know, I don't speak for the Asir or the Vanir. I don't speak for them. I think these powerful things, these indescribable things, speak just fine for themselves, right? Sorry, by the way, if I noticed in one of my videos, I don't really look at the camera very often, because I'm like checking out the birds, and and I tend to ramble off point sometimes, so tough shit. My daughter's got these cardinals, and she's been feeding them like crazy in this winter, just like 2-3 times a day. They're all like getting obese. I don't know how they even fly, you know. But anyhow, so I don't agree with that. I don't want to speak for the gods, right? And of course, the van walking by, like driving by, like, what's that guy doing sitting in the field? Is he poaching? No. Anyway. Yeah, I live out in the country, out in the rural areas, and I love it. It's great. Except sometimes people from small town want to know who's out there. You know? Anyhow, I look at nobody can speak the will of the gods for that sense, if you want to look at it that. However, there tends to be a pattern that you can't ignore either. And yes, you have to acknowledge that these things have an origin, a cultural and historical origin, that do tend to belong to a certain people. And you cannot ignore that. To do so is disingenuous. Now, I've had other people just, I'm surprised at some of the Europeans, you know, that come in and they comment and they'll say, oh, you know, I've been called a Nazi. I'm like, really, a Nazi? It's like my grandfather fought real Nazis in World War II. You know, you know, it's like, really? No, I'm not a National Socialist. Nothing like that. I'm an American. I like liberty. I think we have some problems with our culture and our country. Don't get me wrong. I admire the traditions of the past. And I'm willing to listen to just about anybody express a viewpoint. Like I said, I don't like to pigeonhole people into boxes based on who they might say they are. People usually have complex histories that are worth listening to. I could disagree, you know, but the universalists say you can't disagree. I've had some SJWs get on pagan websites or heathen websites or YouTube channels, and they'll have, like one guy was this on there, and he was asking for solidarity for different people of different ethnic cultures. He was challenging everybody to show solidarity for this cause and that cause, and for redistribution of wealth, and for the people controlling the means of production. And I'm trying, you know, I'm like, okay, what's he here for? So I look at this guy's thing, and he's a Christian Quaker / communist, and he's got all these things. And I'm like, oh well. And I just thought, I told him, I don't sit here. I'm not here to waste my time talking to Christians or communists. So he says, well, your answer is very telling. I'm like, well, you know, your hammer and sickle videos are very telling. You know, it's like, I'm not interested in that. Why is he there? That's not for him. You know, is he trying to convince people? Is he trying to take them away from this discovery? Is he trying to insert his political and religious ideology into this? And I think a lot of that's going on. There's people who, there's an old saying, you know, and I forgot who told me this when I was a kid. They said, it's great to be open-minded, but don't be so open-minded that your brains fall out, right? And I think for the universalists, especially, tend to be very left-leaning. They have tended to do that, and they've gotten to the point where they've their brains have fallen out to the point that they're useful idiots now. They are allowing themselves to, and I'm going to say this, not just with it, whether it's the folkish trying to push a certain racial narrative, very, very strict racial narrative that's based on hating other people for their race, or it's the universalists who are pushing this, you must accept everybody and you must follow these rules, and you must be politically correct and you must do it our way. Those people are not truly interested in this path. They're not really on it. They are using this path as a platform to express their political ideology. They're there to shove their politics down your throat. If they spend as much time, trying to really just take a walk in nature and contemplate the runes, contemplate the Asir, contemplate the Hovmal, contemplate the other traditions throughout Europe. There's a lot of them. It's a big, big thing. They would probably be pleasantly surprised by what they learn about themselves and discoveries they make on their own about this, how it pertains to them personally. It would just open up a lot of doors. And of course, sometimes, and the universalists are the ones that crack me up the most, because of all the trolls I met, they're the ones they want to threaten physical violence. And I'm like, really? It's like, first of all, it's easy to be a tough guy on the internet, I'm like, these guys just, I just cracked up. I think I told my wife, I said I had some chick with purple hair and fairy wings, and her little boyfriend with the big old loopy ear things threatened to kick my ass because I didn't agree with them. And I'm like, oh my God, they got their favorite little anime shows, and hey, nothing wrong with anime. I like some anime, but I'm like, this isn't a video game, kid. The anonymity of the internet saves you. It's like if you did this in person. I'm 6'5" and 270. I've been fighting since I was 12, and I'm 47 now, and I'm not a student at violence. I'm a professor at violence. You don't understand. You're lucky I like coffee and friendship and not harming people, because that's what it could easily be for me, So, but they're funny because I realize they're part of a generation that has grown up in this artificial, everyone gets a trophy, and the trophies come cheaply when they're on a video game or anything else like that. They've never had to compete at a hard level. And I'm not, and again, I don't want to put this whole generation into another box, because there's great kids out there too. There's people that are picking up the torch and moving on just fine. But anyway, I'm looking at, that's really my only real problems I have in comparing the two. I lean a little bit more folkish because I see people trying to preserve authentic tradition, trying to get to the heart of it, trying to recognize where it comes from, and it's not so scattered that it becomes just a mix of everything, because it just becomes this eclectic mix where there's nothing special about it. And there's a ton of traditions out there. There's a ton of knowledge out there. It's just unreal. It's unreal just how much is out there on these European traditions. I haven't even scratched the surface of it. I was looking for an explanation to my experiences, and of course there's all those people that can quote all the different intellectual resources out there, and they judge their status as a heathen or a pagan based on that. And I found that I could tell those ones have never had those experiences. They've never had that direct connection where you feel it, where you see it, where you experience the gods, or the Asir, if you want to call them that, or the Vanir. And for those people, it's like, well, okay, you memorize that, good for you. I like that, it's good, but it's not the same thing. You can learn as much just by staying close to nature. That being said, there's a lot of channels out there, and I like most of them. There's a lot of channels out there, these big channels, and a lot of them lean universalist. A lot of them tend to lean universalist. And great information. I've complimented a lot of them, and they got great production value, and they have presentation and music, and it's entertaining, and I have to say that they sometimes have great stuff, and I compliment them. I tell them I love this, or thanks for this insight, or whatever. It's great. But then some of them are just full of shit. Just full of shit. And I could tell they're entertainers and not educators. They're entertainers, not telling their story. They're entertaining, and I guess it's a way to monetize or whatever, if that's what they're wanting to do. And more power to them. But like, I can use examples. There's Aerith Harger. He's got a lot of great stuff on there. But he inserted himself here not too long ago into some American politics. And he had a lot of strong opinions that were just way off base. And he was passionate about it. And he was clearly virtue signaling. And I second guessed him after that. I was like, okay, wait a second. This guy here presents with authority, a sense of authority on all these subjects. And here he is talking nonsense about American politics, just like firing from his hip. And he doesn't know anything. And he clearly didn't know anything. And it made me think, okay, I have to really watch this guy and second guess everything he presents and double check everything he presents, because his air of authority suddenly meant very little. While he has good material and great content, I have to second guess what his true purpose is on there. And there's this one, what's her name? And she's kind of speaks in goth. She dresses goth and speaks in a spooky voice. And I was kind of I saw her. She talks about freedom and things like that, but yet her and her husband talked about jailing people who spoke against them and exterminating far right, what she called far right heathenry. And I'm like, whoa, what is that? That was creepy. That's the totalitarian in her. And I kind of, like I said, she's got great content too and stuff that's brilliant. But when she started selling like soil from Viking graves, it made me think of those evangelists, the Christians selling anointed holy water and scarves and crap back in the 80s on TV. So I thought, yeah, there's some bullshit going on. There's some fuckery going on there. There's a few others that I like more than others, and I'm willing to listen to just about everybody and give them my ear. But my advice to anybody in my family who sees this later, any of my kids or grandkids who want to follow my footsteps, is, tread with caution. I think the temperature's like 6. Feels great. Coffee helps. Trucks going by carefully on this big old road. So yeah, I think tread with caution. Be careful. There's more bullshit, and some voices just simply, SJWs will just stamp out some voices they totally disagree with, or they'll paint them in a bad light just because they don't agree with their personal politics. And that's unfortunate, because we miss a lot of opportunity for good dialogue. Good dialogue is it. This insistence that we cancel everything we disagree with is absolutely insane. And for me as an American, it's just the antithesis of comparing and contrasting ideas and learning and growing. It doesn't work. So anyway, that's my quick caffeinated freeze my ass off rant out here. It's wonderful weather. I'm kind of suited for this weather. Anyway, that's my take on it, and I just have to say goodbye and good luck. And if anybody's got any ideas, or you think I'm wrong or right, tell me. If you scream it at me, I don't give a shit. Anyway, I'll see you later, folks.